The sun hung low over the jagged cliffs, casting long shadows that danced across the dusty trail. The wind whispered through the dry grass, carrying the scent of sagebrush and smoke from distant campfires. Somewhere ahead, a young woman ran, her breath ragged, her heart pounding like a drum in the silence of the desert. She dared not look back, though she knew the hunters were close. Their shouts echoed off the canyon walls, harsh and relentless. Filling the air with threat and fear, she stumbled over a rock, scraping her palm against the rough surface, but didn't stop. There was no time. She had no choice but to keep running. Her name was Nayeli, and though she was barely 18, her spirit was fierce, tempered by hardship and loss. She had grown up in a small settlement on the edge of the desert, where danger was never far, and survival demanded more than courage. It demanded cunning, speed, and instinct. The hunters were men she had seen before, faces twisted with greed and cruelty. They had followed her from the village, driven by a rumor that she carried something valuable, something that would make them rich beyond imagining. Nayeli clutched a small, carved wooden amulet against her chest, its edges worn smooth by years of being held close. She did not know its full power, only that it was precious and dangerous, and she could not let it fall into their hands. The canyon forked ahead, and she took the narrow path, hoping it would give her some advantage. Rocks tumbled under her feet, and the dry air burned in her lungs. She could hear the hunters' boots clattering behind her, growing louder, closer, their voices sharp with anger. Fear was rising like a tide, threatening to drown her, but she pushed it down. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her falter. Suddenly, shadow moved across the rocks above her, swift and silent. Nayeli froze, her heart skipping a beat. The hunters had stopped too, calling out, unsure of what they saw. And then a voice broke the tension, calm but commanding, slicing through the chaos. "I came to save you," it said. She turned, and there he was. A figure stepping lightly from the shadows, tall and broad-shouldered, his movements fluid like water over stones. His eyes were dark, intense, reflecting both the fire of the setting sun and the quiet danger of a man who had lived through countless battles. His hair was black as midnight, tied back with a simple leather strip, and across his chest was slung a bow, the arrow poised and ready. This was Chetan, an Apache warrior whose name was whispered with respect and fear across the plains. Nayeli's breath caught in her throat. She had heard stories of him, tales of his skill in tracking and hunting, of his loyalty to his people, and of the mysteries that seemed to follow him like a shadow. And now, here he was, offering her sanctuary in a place where trust was rare and danger was everywhere. She wanted to speak, to ask how he had found her, but no words came. Only the pounding of her heart and the urgency of the moment. The hunters' voices rose again. Nayeli realized that time was slipping through her fingers. She had no choice. Chetan held out his hand, steady and sure, and she took it, feeling the strength in his grip. Together, they moved, sliding down a hidden trail that wound between the rocks and led to a small, secluded ravine. It was a path only someone like Chetan would know, a secret he had kept from the world. As they ran, Nayeli stole glances at him. He did not speak, but his presence was enough to steady her panic. His eyes scanned constantly, alert to every sound, every movement. The bond between them was silent but immediate, forged in the shared urgency of survival. She realized that in this man's silence was a promise that he would protect her, no matter the cost. Behind them, the hunters cursed and shouted, but the shadows of the rocks swallowed their forms. Nayeli could hear the clatter of their weapons, the harsh scrape of boots over stone, but they were fading like echoes of a nightmare. Still, the danger was not gone. Somewhere out there, more hunters could be waiting. Somewhere out there, death could be lying in wait. The desert was unforgiving. It had a way of turning even the bravest hearts cold. They reached the edge of a hidden creek, where the water ran clear and cool. Chetan motioned for her to kneel and drink, but she could barely calm herself enough to take a sip. The relief of the cold water was brief, replaced quickly by the adrenaline that would not let her rest. Chetan crouched beside her, scanning the canyon above and below, his eyes like hawks tracking prey. He was a man of few words, but every movement spoke volumes. He was not here for fame, nor for reward. He was here because it was the right thing. Because some instinct, some code older than the land itself, had drawn him to her. Now I wanted to ask why he had chosen to intervene, why he had risked his own life for hers. But the words lodged in her throat. Instead, she watched him, memorizing the way he moved, the curve of his jaw, the intensity in his gaze. He was a protector, a shadow, a storm all at once. And in that moment, she understood something she had never known, that trust was not given lightly. And yet sometimes, it arrived when least expected. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying with it the scent of smoke and horses. Nayeli stiffened. Chaitin's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. He did not speak, but the tension in his body was unmistakable. The hunters were not finished. They were regrouping, closing in from another direction, and this time, they would not be so easily shaken off. Nayeli felt a cold shiver run down her spine. Chaitin stood slowly, his bow drawn, an arrow notched and ready. "Stay close," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. Nayeli obeyed instinctively, her trust in him absolute, even though she barely knew him. Around them, the canyon seemed to hold its breath, the rocks themselves waiting for what would come next. The air was thick with suspense, the kind that made every sound echo, every shadow flicker with potential danger. The hunters' cries grew louder, mingling with the wind. Nayeli could see them now, small figures cresting the ridgeline. Their intent clear, their aim deadly. Panic threatened to rise again, but Chaitin's calm presence anchored her. He moved with precision, silently scanning for the best path, the safest cover, the opportunity to strike first if necessary. "Do you trust me?" he asked, almost quietly, his gaze never leaving the ridgeline. Nayeli nodded, unable to speak. Her trust was instinctual, raw, and immediate. But even as she felt the pull of safety in his presence, fear gnawed at her. They were outnumbered, and the desert offered few options. Every path was fraught with peril. Every rock could hide a bullet. Every shadow could conceal death. And yet in that moment, she realized that sometimes survival demanded more than speed or cunning. Sometimes it demanded faith, courage, and the willingness to follow someone into the unknown. Chaitin had given her that choice, and for the first time since the chase had begun, Nayeli felt a spark of hope. The hunters were almost upon them. Nayeli's pulse raced, her hands trembling. And the creek's water no longer offered comfort, only reflection of the danger closing in. Chaitin stepped forward, arrow poised, eyes locked on the advancing threat. Every muscle in his body was taut, every sense alive. And then the wind shifted again, carrying a faint whistle. A warning from somewhere unseen. Chaitin turned slightly, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the horizon. Nayeli followed his gaze, and her stomach dropped. A larger threat loomed beyond the hunters. Something darker, older, more dangerous than mere men chasing a girl through the desert. She did not know what it was. The feeling in her bones told her it was something that could change everything. Chaitin drew a deep breath, and in that quiet moment, Nayeli knew their flight was far from over. The hunters were closing. The shadows held secrets. And the desert itself seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for the storm that was coming. "Hold on," Chaitin said, his voice steady, though his eyes betrayed the intensity of the moment. Nayeli gripped the amulet tighter, and together they stepped into the unknown. The canyon swallowing them as the first arrow of danger sailed through the air, and the world seemed to tilt on the edge of a knife. The arrow hissed through the air, missing by inches, and embedding itself in the rocky wall with a sharp crack. Nayeli stumbled back, but Chaitin's hand was already on her shoulder, steadying her, anchoring her against the tide of fear that threatened to consume her. The hunters' voices rose in fury, shouts of rage and surprise bouncing off the canyon walls. Nayeli's eyes darted between the shadows, trying to decipher the shapes that lurked. To measure how far they had to run, Chaitin moved with a fluid grace, sliding behind a jagged boulder and signaling Nayeli to follow. His every motion was precise, measured, as if the desert itself obeyed his command. Nayeli obeyed, though her muscles were trembling, her breath ragged. She realized for the first time that the man beside her was not only a warrior, but a guardian. A force of nature shaped by the land, the wind, and the fires of countless battles. As they crouched behind the boulder, Chaitan's eyes swept over the canyon. "They're organized," he murmured, almost to himself. "Not just hunters. Men with a plan." His jaw tightened, and his hand moved to the quiver at his back, fingers brushing the smooth wood of arrows ready for flight. Nally's mind raced. If these men were more than hunters, if they sought something greater than gold or simple plunder, then the danger she carried, the amulet, was more important than she had ever imagined. She remembered the stories her mother had told her, whispered late at night by the fire, tales of ancient relics and forgotten powers buried deep in the earth. The amulet had been in her family for generations, a gift from a mysterious traveler who had claimed it could protect those who carried it from harm, though at a cost. Nayeli had never understood the warnings, never believed the old tales. But now, in the shadow of the canyon, with death echoing close behind, she understood. There was something in her hands more dangerous than she could name. Chaitan's voice cut through her thoughts, low and firm. "We move when I give the signal." "Not a step before," she nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. Trust was all she had, and this man had earned it in the span of a single moment. She could feel the weight of the amulet against her chest, its edges warm from her grip, and she wondered if it was the key to survival or the reason they were hunted at all. The canyon seemed to hold its breath. Even the wind had stilled, as if waiting for what would come next. The hunters were reorganizing, their shouts replaced by the soft scrape of boots against stone, the faint jingle of metal as weapons were readied. Nayeli caught sight of one of the broad-shouldered man with a scar across his cheek, eyes cold and calculating. He was no ordinary hunter. He moved with purpose, scanning every crevice, every shadow, as if he knew the terrain better than anyone else. Chaitan's eyes narrowed. "They've been tracking you longer than I thought," he said almost quietly. "Someone sent them. Someone who knows what you carry." Nayeli's heart skipped. The thought that her danger was orchestrated, not random, made the world feel smaller and more threatening. There was a plan behind the chase, a strategy, and she was the center of it. "Why me?" she whispered, barely audible. The words trembled with fear and confusion. Chaitan did not answer immediately. Instead, he studied her face, the fear in her eyes, and the tension in her posture. Finally, he spoke, his voice low, almost like a growl. "Because what you carry is important. Because the wrong hands could destroy more than just you, more than just this land." His words were cryptic, but they carried weight, a warning she could not ignore. Nayeli felt the gravity of the moment pressing down, as if the canyon itself was aware of the danger. She thought of her family, long gone, lost to the harshness of life on the edge of the desert. The settlement where she had grown up was a memory now, burned into her mind with clarity and pain. She had learned to survive alone, to trust only herself, and yet here she was, following a stranger into uncertainty, hoping against hope that he was the answer to her prayers. Chaitan's gaze shifted upward, toward a narrow ledge that led further into the canyon. "This way," he said, and motioned for her to follow. Nayeli obeyed, her legs shaking, her hands brushing against the cool stone as they climbed. The path was treacherous, uneven, and the sound of pursuing footsteps echoed from below, a constant reminder that the hunters were relentless. As they moved, Nayeli finally found her voice. "Who sent them?" she asked, her words trembling. Chaitan shook his head, his expression shadowed. "I don't know, but whoever it is, they are powerful, and they will not stop until they have what they want." His eyes met hers, sharp and unwavering. "We have to keep moving. There is no other choice." The canyon widened into a small plateau where scrub and rocks gave way to a stand of twisted, ancient trees. Here the air smelled of pine and earth, a strange comfort in the midst of chaos. Chaitan paused, scanning the horizon again. "We are not safe," he said, "but we can gain a few moments. Catch your breath. Be ready. They will follow." Nayeli sank to the ground, her chest heaving. She touched the amulet again, feeling its warmth and the subtle hum that seemed to emanate from it. There was a power here she could not explain, a force that seemed alive, connected to the land itself. And she realized with a mixture of fear and awe that the hunters knew of it. That was why they were relentless. That was why she had been chased without mercy. Chaitin crouched beside her, his expression unreadable. "The desert holds many secrets," he said. "Some are dangerous. Some are ancient. Some are alive." He looked down at her, his eyes intense. "What you carry is one of those secrets, and others would kill for it without a second thought." Nayeli shivered. She wanted to ask more, to understand, but the words caught in her throat. Her mind was a storm of questions, of fear, of memories she had buried deep. And yet, amidst the chaos, she felt a strange calm. She was no longer running alone. She had Chaitin, a protector, a guide, a force she could rely on. But even as she felt that fragile thread of hope, the wind shifted again. A distant shout reached them, sharp and urgent. Nayeli's stomach dropped. The hunters were close, closer than she had imagined, and they were not the only danger. Something else stirred beyond the trees, something hidden, something older than the desert itself. The air vibrated with it, a tension that made her skin prickle and her heart pound. Chaitin rose slowly, moving to the edge of the plateau, bow in hand. His eyes scanned the horizon, sharp and unyielding. Nayeli followed, peering over his shoulder, and what she saw made her blood run cold. Shadows moved among the trees, but not like men. They were too fast, too silent, too deliberate. A ripple of fear coursed through her. The hunters were not alone. Whatever was here with them was different. Chaitin did not speak immediately. He only drew an arrow, his muscles coiled, his eyes narrowing. "Stay behind me," he said finally, his voice low, almost a warning to the wind itself. Nayeli nodded, gripping the amulet, feeling its pulse against her chest. She had no idea what lay ahead, but she knew this. The chase was far from over. And the desert held secrets that were older and darker than anything she had imagined. The plateau was silent for a heartbeat, broken only by the whisper of wind through the trees. Then a rustle, sharp and deliberate, came from the shadows. Nayeli felt a surge of panic, but Chaitin's calm presence held her steady. The hunters were not the only threat. Something else was coming. Something that had been waiting for her, for the amulet. For the moment that would tip the balance between life and death, Nayeli's mind raced. Her thoughts tangled with fear and curiosity. Who had sent the hunters? What power did the amulet truly hold? And what was lurking beyond the trees, in the shadows that seemed alive with intent? She could not know, not yet. All she could do was trust Chaitin, follow his lead, and prepare herself for the storm that was coming. Chaitin's eyes flicked to her briefly, a silent question in his gaze. "Are you ready?" Nayeli swallowed, gripping the amulet with both hands. She did not have an answer, not a real one, but she had to try. Because the desert had a way of demanding courage, of forcing choices no one was prepared for. And the moment of truth was closer than she could imagine. A branch snapped somewhere in the trees and Nayeli froze. Chaitin's body tensed, bow drawn, arrow ready. The hunters' voices rose again, and the shadows shifted, deeper, darker. The plateau seemed to shrink around them, pressing in with the weight of uncertainty and danger. Nayeli's pulse raced. She could feel the desert watching, listening, waiting, and then, from the edge of the trees, a figure stepped forward. Tall, silent, and impossible to read. Nayeli's breath caught. Chaitin's eyes narrowed. This was not one of the hunters. This was something else. Something older. Something that had been waiting for her long before the chase began. The wind shifted, carrying a scent of smoke and earth. Nayeli clutched the amulet, feeling its warmth against her chest, and realized that whatever came next would change everything. She did not know if she was ready, but there was no turning back. Chaitin stepped forward, bow at the ready. "Stay behind me," he said again. His voice was calm, unyielding. Nayeli nodded, heart pounding, eyes wide. The shadows held secrets. The hunters were relentless. and the desert itself seemed alive with danger. And then, as the figure moved closer, the world seemed to hold its breath. Waiting for the storm that was about to break, the figure from the trees did not move like a man. Its steps were deliberate, quiet, yet each movement carried weight, as though the earth itself obeyed it. Nayeli's fingers tightened around the amulet, its warmth spreading through her palm, pulsing with a rhythm she couldn't yet understand. She glanced at Chatin. His posture was rigid, muscles coiled, eyes dark and sharp. He did not flinch. But the subtle tension in his shoulders told her that he sensed what she could only feel. This was not just another hunter. This was something older, more dangerous. Behind them, the canyon seemed alive with whispers. Nayeli thought she could hear the faint crack of twigs, the scrape of boots, even the soft murmur of water running somewhere deep beneath the rocks. The hunters were regrouping, creeping closer with silent precision. The scar-faced man led them, scanning every shadow, every stone, so he could anticipate their moves before they happened. He did not speak. His eyes said enough. He knew the amulet's importance. He would not stop until it was in his hands. Chatin shifted, keeping his body between Nayeli and the approaching figure. "Stay close," he said, his voice low, firm. He drew an arrow and nocked it, but his gaze never left the figure. There was something in its presence that made the air thick, heavy, almost suffocating. Nayeli felt the hair rise on her arms. Fear pressed against her chest, but it was mingled with a strange curiosity. The figure was moving with purpose, yet it carried no weapon she could see. It was the calm before a storm, the quiet edge of danger that left the mind restless and alert. Nayeli's thoughts turned to the amulet again. Its history had always been a mystery, whispered in half-forgotten stories from her mother and grandmother. It had been handed down for generations, and she knew only fragments, warnings of power, of danger, of a responsibility heavier than the desert sun. She had never imagined it would bring hunters, war, or a stranger like Chatin into her life. But now she understood that the amulet was not just an heirloom. It was a beacon, something that drew both protectors and predators. Something that carried a weight of history she could barely comprehend. The figure paused a few paces from the trees, its shape becoming clearer. Nayeli caught the glint of something metallic, faint, and unreadable. It did not speak, but its presence communicated a message she could not translate. It was watching, waiting, assessing, as though it had known she would come to this plateau long before she had ever left the village. Nayeli's pulse quickened. The desert, the hunters, the figure, it all felt like part of a web that had been spun centuries ago. Strands of fate she could not see, but could feel tugging at her very soul. Chatin's eyes flicked to Nayeli. "Whatever comes next," he said, "you must trust me. Not for me, but for yourself." His voice carried authority, but beneath it was a warning. He was not just preparing for a fight. He was preparing her for a test, one that might shape the course of her life, and perhaps the lives of many others. Nayeli nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. She did not fully understand what he meant, but the urgency in his tone left no room for doubt. Behind the plateau, the hunters were making their move. The scar-faced man signaled with a hand, and the others split into two groups, encircling the plateau. They were methodical, precise, practiced in the art of tracking and ambush. Nayeli realized with a jolt that they were not merely after the amulet for its value. They wanted it for control, for leverage, for power over forces she could barely imagine. The thought made her stomach churn, a mix of fear and determination tightening her chest. As the hunters advanced, the figure in the trees moved again. It glided forward silently, no rush, no panic, as if it had all the time in the world. Nayeli felt the hair on her neck stand on end. There was an intelligence there, a presence that seemed aware of everything the hunters. The plateau, the wind, even the pulse of the amulet. She could feel it in her bones. This was not a mere human opponent. It was something that had existed long before her ancestors, something tied to the land, to the desert, to the very history of the people who had walked these canyons for generations. Chatin shifted slightly. Drawing a second arrow and gripping it with a quiet confidence that spoke of years in the wilderness. "They are not here by chance," he muttered. "Someone is guiding them. Someone who knows the desert like I do, but with a different purpose." His eyes scanned the canyon edges, calculating, assessing, weighing risk against opportunity. Nayeli wondered what memories, what experiences, had sharpened him into this living weapon. This guardian, capable of reading the desert as if it spoke a language only he could understand. A sudden cry erupted from below. Out! The hunters had discovered their escape route. Nellie's heart jumped into her throat. Chayton sprang into action, drawing another arrow. But the figure from the trees raised a hand, almost as if halting the tide of danger. The hunters froze, confused, unsure. Nayeli felt a flicker of something strange, almost otherworldly. The air seemed charged, as though electricity ran through the ground and air alike. She gripped the amulet tighter, its pulse stronger now, as if reacting to the figure, to Chatton, to the unfolding chaos. Then the plateau shook slightly. The sound of stones grinding against each other, and a new layer of fear entered Nayeli's mind. The desert itself was alive, or at least it seemed so. Responding to the tension, the danger, the ancient forces now converging, she realized that this chase was more than survival. It was the beginning of a conflict she could barely imagine, one that spanned generations, one that involved forces she could not yet name. Chayton's voice broke through the fear. "Keep moving," he said, nodding toward a narrow ledge that led deeper into a hidden ravine. "We cannot stay here. If they have come this far, they will not stop until they have what they seek." Nayeli rose to her feet, trembling, and followed him. Every step was careful, deliberate, yet the path was narrow, precarious. One misstep could send them tumbling into the canyon below. Yet she moved, driven by trust, by desperation, and by the pull of the amulet she could not yet understand. As they advanced, Nayeli began to notice subtle changes in the canyon marks on the rocks. Faint carvings half buried in sand and dust, patterns that seemed familiar yet foreign. Chayton paused occasionally, his hand brushing over them, tracing lines with a knowledge that made Nayeli's head spin. "These markings," he said quietly, "tell a story. They warn of those who seek power beyond understanding. They tell of guardians who will rise when the land is threatened. And they hint at the consequences of failure." Nayeli glanced at the amulet, its warmth now almost insistent, like a heartbeat echoing her own. She felt a connection she could not name, a thread linking her to the past. To the desert, to the figure in the trees, and to Chatton. She realized that the conflict was not merely with hunters or strangers. It was with history itself, with forces she could barely comprehend. And she wondered if she was ready to face it. A sudden noise shattered her thoughts. A low, guttural sound from somewhere ahead. Chayton froze, listening. "Something moves ahead," he said, voice tight. "Not human." Nayeli's heart raced. She had already sensed it, the presence that had made the air thick, the pulse of danger that seemed alive. Now it was real, tangible. Something unseen yet pressing in on them from all sides. The hunters were regrouping. But their movements were slower now, hesitant. The figure in the trees moved with them, silent, patient, waiting for the perfect moment. Nayeli felt the desert closing around her, the tension pressing in from every side. Her mind reeled with questions, fears, and glimpses of a destiny she had not chosen but could not escape. Chayton turned to her, eyes intense. "Whatever comes next," he said, "remember this. The amulet is not just protection. It is a beacon. It is a warning. And it may demand more of you than you think." Nayeli's grip tightened, the pulse of the amulet synchronizing with her own heartbeat. She understood then that the journey ahead would test every ounce of courage, every instinct, every trust she had in herself and in Chayton. From the canyon below, shout rose again, more urgent this time. The hunters were pressing forward, but the figure in the trees did not move to attack. Nayeli realized that this was not merely a chase, it was a trial. Every step, every breath, every heartbeat mattered. The desert had set the stage. The hunters were the immediate danger. but something older, something waiting in the shadows, was the real test. Chaitin drew another arrow, his eyes scanning every shadow, every movement, while Nayeli followed, heart pounding, mind racing. The plateau was shrinking behind them, the canyon narrowing, the presence in the trees growing stronger, almost tangible. She could feel it pressing against her senses, pushing her forward, demanding attention, demanding courage. And then, just as they reached the edge of the hidden ravine, a sudden movement caught their eyes. A shadow shifted in the distance, larger than any man, impossible to place. Nayeli froze. Chaitin's bow twitched in his hands, arrow ready, eyes narrowed. The desert seemed to hush, holding its breath. The hunter's cries faded slightly, replaced by the quiet hum of something ancient. Something alive. The figure stepped forward again, slow, deliberate, revealing nothing, concealing everything. Nayeli realized then that the next moment would change everything. The amulet pulsed hotter in her hands, warning her, urging her, binding her to a destiny she could not yet name. Chaitin whispered, almost to himself, "We are not prepared for what comes next, but we have no choice." Nayeli's breath caught, the desert echoing with tension, the hunters closing, the shadows alive, the figure waiting. She gripped the amulet, tightened her stance, and followed Chaitin into the unknown, into a conflict that was larger than life, larger than history, larger than anything she had ever imagined. The desert watched, silent and patient, as the storm of fate, danger, and mystery closed around them. The wind carried an eerie stillness as Nayeli and Chaitin pressed deeper into the ravine. Every step was measured, careful, but the tension was nearly unbearable. The hunters were still behind them, their persistence relentless, but it was the presence ahead, the shadowy figure, and the pulse of the amulet that held her attention most. The desert seemed to stretch and twist, alive with anticipation, every rock and tree a potential trap, every echo a warning. Nayeli's legs ached. Her chest burned from exertion, but adrenaline and fear pushed her forward. She could feel Chaitin just ahead, his every move precise, eyes scanning, bow ready. There was a rhythm to him, a quiet confidence that both terrified and comforted her. She had learned to trust him in the past hours as she had never trusted anyone. Yet the unknown that lay ahead made every heartbeat feel like a drum announcing danger. The shadow shifted again, emerging slightly from the trees. Nayeli caught a glint of something metallic at its side, a dagger, or perhaps a weapon, unlike any she had seen before. The figure paused, unthreatened by the hunter's approach, as if it were in control of the unfolding events. Nayeli felt the amulet pulse hotter, almost like a heartbeat in her hands. It was warning her, guiding her, tethering her to something far greater than survival alone. Chaitin moved closer to her side, brushing her hand lightly to signal her to stay silent. "Whatever you do," he whispered, "do not react until I give the sign. This is not a battle of strength. It is a test of patience." Nayeli's pulse raced as she nodded. The quiet voice of command, steady and unwavering, kept her tethered even as fear threatened to overtake her. The hunters were regrouping below, frustrated by the pause in the chase. The scar-faced man shouted, waving his arms, but the figure in the trees did not flinch. It was a silent threat, commanding without words. Nayeli wondered what it wanted, or if it even wanted anything at all from them. Its eyes, dark and unyielding, seemed to hold centuries of knowledge, secrets buried beneath the sands of the desert, and a power that made her stomach churn. Chaitin signaled for Nayeli to follow him along a narrow ledge that curved around the ravine. Every step was precarious. A slip could send them tumbling into the depths below. She could hear the hunters' frustrated shouts echoing against the rocks. But the presence ahead remained calm, patient, observing. Nellie's fingers dug into the amulet. It hummed against her palm, almost alive, almost pleading. She realized that its purpose was far more than protection. It was guiding them toward something, toward a moment that could change everything. They moved in silence, the air thick with anticipation. Chaitin occasionally glanced over his shoulder, ensuring Nayeli was following, his eyes scanning for every possible threat. The plateau below had narrowed into a gorge, the path becoming steeper, more dangerous. Nayeli felt her heart pounding in her chest. She had survived so much already, yet this felt like the true test, the moment where survival would no longer be enough suddenly. The shadow stepped forward fully, revealing its form. It was taller than a man, cloaked in layers that blended with the desert, face partially hidden by a hood. But its presence was commanding, almost otherworldly. Nayeli's breath caught. This was not merely an opponent, it was something older, something that had been waiting for her, for the amulet, and perhaps for Chaitin as well. She could sense a power radiating from it, a quiet intensity that made the hair on her arms stand on end. The hunters below finally advanced, but their movements were cautious now, hesitant, as though they too could sense the presence that made the air tremble. Nayeli's stomach knotted. She realized that survival depended not just on speed or cunning, but on understanding the forces at play. And she knew instinctively that the amulet, Chaitin, and the shadow were all connected in ways she could not yet comprehend. Chaitin crouched slightly, drawing an arrow and pointing it toward the figure. "Wait," he whispered. "We do not strike yet. Let them make the first move. Let them reveal their intentions." Nayeli nodded, though every instinct screamed to act, to defend, to run. But she trusted him. She had no choice. Every ounce of fear, every thundering heartbeat, was tethered to the fragile thread of trust she had placed in him. The shadow shifted closer, stepping toward them with deliberate grace. Nayeli felt the pulse of the amulet intensify, almost urgent now, vibrating with a power she could not name. She understood then that they were approaching the moment that would define everything. The hunters below faltered, shouting orders, but their voices seemed distant, swallowed by the canyon and the tension that thickened the air. Chaitin's voice was a whisper, yet it carried over the wind. "Be ready," he said. "Whatever happens now, we cannot falter. This is the moment the desert has been waiting for. The amulet will guide us, but it will demand courage, and so will we." Nellie's chest tightened. Courage was no longer a choice. It was a necessity. Every muscle in her body coiled like a spring, ready to react, ready to leap, ready to survive. The shadow finally spoke, its voice low, melodic and strange, carrying a weight that seemed to echo through the canyon itself. "You carry what should not be carried," it said, "and yet it has chosen you. The desert has its eyes upon this moment, and the balance will shift soon. Prepare or be swept away." Naheli's fingers tightened around the amulet. Its warmth surged, a comforting pulse against her fear, a tether to something ancient and protective. Below them, hunters had regrouped, their movements faster, more desperate. They pressed forward with renewed determination, shouting commands, waving weapons. The scar-faced man's eyes burned with fury and greed. He did not understand the presence above, the figure in the trees, the power of the amulet. But he knew he could not fail. He would stop at nothing to claim what he sought. Chaitin's eyes flicked between the shadow and the hunters, calculating, weighing. "We move now," he said. Nayeli followed instinctively, clutching the amulet, every nerve on edge. The narrow ledge ended at a small opening in the cliff, leading into a hidden grove. Sunlight filtered through twisted trees, painting the rocks with golden light, yet the shadows seemed to move with intent, as if alive. The figure stepped aside slightly, allowing them passage, but the tension in the air did not ease. Nayeli realized then that this was not a path of safety. It was a test, a trial. Every step forward carried risk, every breath was a gamble, every glance might invite danger. The hunters below pressed on, shouting, reckless now. Blinded by greed and desperation, Chaitin moved quickly, silently, keeping his eyes on both the figure ahead and the hunters below. Nahel's pulse raced. The amulet hummed like a heartbeat, a connection she could feel deep in her chest. It guided her steps, steadied her fear, and reminded her of the weight of what she carried. Every instinct screamed to flee, but every ounce of trust in Chaitin anchored her, kept her moving forward. Suddenly, a rock shifted above them, small at first, then larger. tumbling toward the hunters below. A cry went up, and they scattered, momentarily distracted by the danger. Niali's heart leaped. The shadow had moved, subtle and unseen, guiding the natural forces of the canyon against the pursuers. The amulet pulsed hotter, almost with approval, and she felt a flicker of understanding. This was more than a battle of survival. It was a test of harmony with the desert, with the land, with forces she had only begun to sense. Chaitin whispered, his voice steady despite the chaos. Stay close. We are almost there. The moment approaches, and the desert will demand its judgment. Niali nodded, though her breath came in shallow gasps. She did not know what lay ahead, only that every step carried them closer to a truth she could barely imagine. The hunters below were faltering, but they were not defeated. The shadow above remained calm, patient, an enigmatic guide. Waiting for the moment when all threads would converge, the hidden grove came into view. Bathed in dappled sunlight, twisted trees forming a natural barrier around a small pool of clear water. The presence of the shadow felt stronger here, almost tangible, as if it was drawing the land itself into a circle of power. Niali felt the amulet pulse in rhythm with the air, the wind, the unseen heartbeat of the desert. She understood, in a deep, instinctual way, that this place was sacred, chosen for a reason she could not yet name. Chaitin turned to her, eyes intense. Here, he said, everything changes. This is where the balance will be tested, where the hunter's greed will meet forces they do not understand, and where your courage will matter more than anything else. Niali's chest tightened. Fear, anticipation, and determination mingled into a single, sharp edge. She gripped the amulet, feeling its warmth surge through her, as though it were alive, preparing her for what was to come. From the canyon below, the hunter's shouts grew desperate. The scar-faced man's voice rose above the rest, a furious roar. Do not let them escape. We will have it. We will have her. Neil's pulse thundered. The danger was near, but it was no longer just the hunters. The shadow above, the amulet, the desert itself, they all converged toward a moment she could not yet see. A climax that would test every ounce of courage she possessed. Chaitin's eyes met hers, steady and unwavering. Be ready, he said. The storm is coming, and when it does, everything will change. Niali nodded, clutching the amulet. Her heart raced, her breath shallow. The hunters below pressed closer. The shadow above remained calm, and the desert held its breath. The moment of truth was approaching, a crescendo of fear, courage, and mystery drawing tight around them. Niali felt the amulet vibrate, a living pulse that connected her to the land, to Chaitin, and to the shadow itself. She realized then that what lay ahead would demand all she had, yet it might also lead her to a future she had never imagined. And as the hunters neared, their voices shouting, and the shadow waited silently, the grove seemed to hold its breath. Preparing for the storm that would change everything, the wind shifted. Soft and warm, carrying the faint scent of sage and desert earth. Niali's hands trembled around the amulet, but the pulse had calmed, no longer urgent but steady, almost like a heartbeat that matched her own. The hunters below had faltered, disoriented by the shadow that had guided the natural dangers against them. And now they were retreating, their shouts fading as quickly as they had come. Niali could feel the weight of relief settling over her, a fragile, beautiful thing that made her knees weak. Chaitin lowered his bow, letting the arrow rest against the string. His dark eyes swept the grove, ensuring the threat had passed. Then slowly he turned to her. There was a softness there now, a quiet warmth that had not been present in the tense hours of pursuit. It's over, he said, voice steady but gentle. The desert has protected you. The hunters, they will not return. Niali exhaled, a long, shaky breath that carried away hours of fear and uncertainty. She wanted to speak, to thank him, to say everything her heart felt. But words failed her. The shadow that had guided them now stepped closer. Niali saw its face clearly, for the first time a figure older than memory. Cloaked in the earth's colors, eyes deep and knowing. It nodded once, slowly, as if acknowledging that the trial had been met. Nayeli felt the amulet pulse one last time, its warmth spreading through her chest, soothing the tension, filling her with a sense of belonging she had never known. The figure whispered words she could barely hear, a voice like wind through the canyon. The balance is restored. The path is yours now. Protect it, honor it, and you will carry its strength. Then it stepped back, fading into the grove's shadows, leaving a quiet that felt almost holy. Nayeli blinked, taking in the stillness. She realized that the danger had passed, that she was alive, that the chase, the fear, the uncertainty had all led to this moment. Her chest swelled with gratitude, fear still lingering at the edges, but softened by relief and the presence of Chatten at her side. Chatten knelt beside her, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. "You were brave," he said, his voice low, sincere. "You faced more than any one person should. The desert recognized your courage, and it protected you because of it." Nayeli felt warmth rush to her cheeks. She wanted to respond, to speak, but only a shaky nod came. She realized then that courage was not absence of fear, but moving forward despite it, together. They moved to the pool at the grove's center. The water was clear, reflecting the sunlight like liquid gold. Nayeli knelt, dipping her hands in, feeling the cold rush over her skin, washing away the last traces of panic. She held the amulet over the water for a moment, letting its warmth mingle with the cool liquid. The pulse had slowed, steady now, a quiet hum of protection, of life, of connection. The amulet had chosen her, but it had also guided her, teaching her about strength, patience, and trust. Chaitin joined her by the water, kneeling silently. "The hunters will not return," he said again. "And the amulet, it has revealed its purpose. But there will always be those who seek power. You must be careful, Nayeli, but not fearful. Courage will always guide you, and the desert. The desert will always protect those who respect it." Nayeli's eyes met his. In them, she saw not just strength, but a deep understanding of the land, of the people, and of the forces that shaped their lives as they sat by the pool. Nayeli thought of the hunters, of the scar-faced man who had led them with greed and violence. She realized that their pursuit had not just been for the amulet, but for control, for power over forces they could not comprehend. The desert, the shadow, the amuletal had reminded her that true power was not taken by force, but earned through respect, courage, and heart. It was a lesson she would never forget. The grove was quiet now, bathed in golden light. Chetan stood and extended his hand to her. "Come," he said. "It's time to leave this place, to return to the land where you belong, stronger and wiser than before." Aili took his hand, feeling the strength and reassurance in his grip. Together, they began to climb out of the ravine, each step steady, measured, guided by the pulse of the desert and the amulet's quiet hum as they emerged from the shadowed grove. The canyon opened into a wide valley, the sun spilling over the rocks in warmth and light. The hunters were gone, vanished into the desert like a distant memory, their greed and violence swallowed by the canyon's vastness. Nayeli felt a thrill of freedom, a deep, almost overwhelming joy at the survival she had fought so hard for. She understood that this was not just a physical victory, but a triumph of spirit, of courage, of heart. Chatten walked beside her, his gaze scanning the valley, protective but relaxed. "The desert is forgiving," he said, "but it is also demanding. You have shown it courage, respect, and patience. That is why it has protected you." Nayeli nodded, the weight of understanding settling over her. She had faced danger, fear, and uncertainty, but she had survived, and in surviving, she had grown, learned, discovered a strength she had never known. As they walked, Nayeli finally spoke, her voice steady, though soft. "Thank you, Chaitan, for everything. I don't know what I would have done without you." He looked at her, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips, a warmth in his dark eyes. "You would have survived," he said quietly. "Perhaps not as gracefully, perhaps not as quickly, but you would have. Courage is in you, Nayeli. It always has been." They continued through the valley, the sun lowering toward the horizon, painting the rocks with shades of gold and crimson. The amulet rested against Nayeli's chest, warm and steady, a reminder of the lessons she had learned, of the danger she had survived, and of the power she now understood. It was more than protection. It was guidance, a connection to the land, to the past, to the life she was stepping into. Chaitin finally stopped at a high ridge overlooking the valley. "From here," he said, "you can see how vast this land is, how much life it holds, and how many paths are yet to be walked. The desert is your guide. Nayeli, as long as you honor it, respect it, and carry courage with you." Nayeli gazed out over the valley, the wind in her hair, the warmth of the setting sun on her face, and she felt a sense of peace she had not known before. The fear, the chase, the shadow, the hunters, all of it had led to this moment. She turned to Chaitin. "I will honor it," she said. "I promise. And I will remember everything you taught me." He nodded, satisfied, the tension in his posture finally relaxing. For the first time in days, Nayeli felt the weight of fear lift, replaced by hope, gratitude, and a quiet joy that came from surviving, learning, and growing. As they began to walk down the ridge toward the settlement she had once called home, Nayeli felt the pulse of the amulet, steady and comforting. She understood now that it was not a burden, but a gift, a guide, a reminder that courage and heart mattered more than any force in the desert. The lessons of the chase, the shadow, the hunters, and the hidden grove would remain with her forever, shaping the life she would lead. Chaitin walked beside her, silent but present, a guardian and friend who would become an unspoken part of her journey. Nayeli realized that the greatest victory was not just surviving the hunters or escaping the shadow. It was discovering the strength within herself, the courage to face the unknown, and the understanding that she could trust both herself and those who truly cared for her as the sun dipped below the horizon. Painting the sky in shades of fire and gold, Nayeli felt a sense of completion, of harmony with the land and with her own spirit. The desert had tested her, guided her, and protected her. She had faced danger, mystery, and fear, and emerged stronger, wiser, and unbroken. And with Chaitin by her side, she knew she was ready to face whatever came next. Not with fear, but with courage, heart, and hope. The wind carried a soft, soothing whisper, like the desert itself was congratulating her, welcoming her, acknowledging the trials she had endured. Nayeli took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the setting sun, the steady pulse of the amulet, and the presence of Chaitin beside her. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she smiled fully, freely, knowing that she was safe, that she had learned, and that her journey was only beginning. The canyon, the grove, the hunters, and the shadow were all behind her now. Memories and lessons intertwined. Nayeli felt a profound gratitude for the desert, for Chaitin, and for the amulet that had guided her through the darkness. She understood that life would continue to challenge her, but she was ready. She had the courage, the wisdom, and the heart to face whatever came next. And as the stars began to twinkle above the vast, quiet valley, Nayeli and Chaitin continued down the ridge, the amulet resting against her chest, a steady reminder of strength, guidance, and hope. The desert stretched endlessly before them, full of life, mystery, and possibility. And for the first time in a long while, Nayeli felt a peace that was deep, enduring, and real. The night settled gently over the land, the wind carrying whispers of protection, courage, and promise. Nayeli's journey was far from over, but she had survived the storm, learned the lessons of the desert, and discovered the true meaning of trust, heart, and bravery. The amulet pulsed quietly, steady and warm, a guardian in its own right, and Nayeli knew that she was ready to face the future, whatever it might hold. Together, she and Chaitin walked into the valley, the setting sun casting long shadows that promised a new day, a life filled with hope, courage, and the freedom to embrace whatever lay ahead. And the desert, silent and eternal, watched over them, carrying its lessons, its power, and its quiet blessing into the night.